For millions of years, the African sun has been a merciless executioner, baking the vast golden savanna in relentless heat. Other predators hide in the shadows, panting, trapped and restricted by their own thick fur coats. But one curious primate chose a different path, a radical rebellion against the natural order, shedding its fur entirely. This magnificent biological cooling system, millions of active sweat glands, allowed them to run under the blazing midday sun. While leopards and lions slept, our ancestors ran, exhausting their prey through sheer, unyielding endurance. The persistence hunt was a triumph, but this evolutionary victory carried a terrifying, hidden cost. Stripped of their protective fur coat, their bare skin was completely exposed, completely vulnerable to the elements. The very sun that fueled their hunt now scorched their flesh, blistering the skin without mercy. And the danger didn't stop there. Bloodthirsty insects swarmed, finding an endless feast on unprotected bodies. Every thorn bush left deep gashes. Every trek through the tall grass became a painful, bloody ordeal. To survive the heat, they had traded their natural armor, leaving themselves defenseless against a hostile world. They were dying slowly under the sun. If nature wouldn't provide a shield, they would have to invent one. A desperate hand reached into a drying pool, scooping up a handful of thick, blood-red clay. The first artificial skin was not woven. It was smeared, baking into a cracked, protective shell against the light. But as the ancient climate slowly shifted, this fragile armor of mud would soon face a deadly, freezing test. Nature is unforgiving, but human intellect is the ultimate weapon, adapting when biology fails. Inside the shadows of Blombos Cave, 100,000 years ago, a revolutionary industry was born out of sheer desperation. They did not weave fabric. They harvested the blood-red earth, crushing iron-rich ochre with heavy quartzite stones, mixing the vibrant dust inside large abalone shells with animal fat and charcoal. This was no mere decoration. It was the world's first cosmetic armor, a thick, protective paste meticulously smeared across their vulnerable, hairless skin. This brilliant invention blocked the blistering ultraviolet rays of the equatorial sun and effectively repelled the relentless swarms of disease-carrying insects. The ochre even acted as a soothing balm, healing deep scratches from the savanna thorns. Dressed in this earthen shield, our ancestors were no longer defenseless victims of the sun. They had successfully taken their first defiant step against the brutal laws of evolution. But the horizon beckoned, and a restless urge drove them away from the warm equator. The Great Migration north was beginning, straight toward a frozen, unforgiving hell. The Great Migration led them far from the sun, deep into the frozen heart of Eurasia. Here, nature unleashed its ultimate weapon, the unforgiving wrath of the last ice age. Temperatures plummeted to a deadly -40 degrees, turning the air into breathing shards of glass. The red ochre armor that saved them in Africa now became a frozen death trap. The thick mud froze solid, cracking and peeling off their shivering, bare skin like broken ceramic. Without fur, without protection, the heat was sucked rapidly from their bodies. Frostbite blackened their fingers. Hypothermia began to cloud their desperate minds. This was not an environment they could endure. This was a slow, agonizing execution. They huddled together in dark ice caves, watching their children fade away in the freezing dark. The rebellion of shedding their fur had finally caught up to them. Nature was claiming its revenge. But as death closed in, a desperate pair of eyes peered out into the raging whiteout. Giant shadows moved through the snowstorm, unbothered, warm, and perfectly adapted. Massive woolly mammoths and thick-furred ice wolves, wearing the very coats our ancestors had abandoned. To survive this white hell, they couldn't just invent a new skin, they would have to steal one. In the frozen wastelands of Eurasia, survival demanded the ultimate sacrifice of another. They could not grow their own fur, so they became the most ruthless thieves in the animal kingdom. Armed with sharp stone spears in desperate hunger, they hunted the very beasts that ignored the cold. It was a brutal, bloody exchange of life for warmth, a theft of nature's perfect design. Using primitive stone scrapers, they violently stripped the thick, heavy pelts from the fallen carcasses. Every cut, every tear, was a frantic race against the freezing wind to claim their new armor. The raw, bloody hides were heavy, stiff, and completely alien to their hairless bodies. Throwing the thick pelts over their shivering shoulders, humanity finally wore its first stolen coat. They transformed into monstrous silhouettes, half human, half beast, walking defiantly through the apocalyptic blizzard. The stolen skin provided immediate, life-saving heat, but the victory was dangerously deceptive. These early garments were loose and unrefined, just crude blankets wrapped hastily around freezing limbs. Every violent movement, every swing of a spear, caused the heavy furs to slip and fall open. The freezing, -40-degree wind instantly sliced through every gap, relentlessly seeking their bare skin. They had stolen the fur, but they couldn't seal the cold out. Hypothermia still stalked them. To truly conquer the ice, wrapping was not enough. They needed a way to bind the pieces together. But here lies a profound archaeological mystery. How do we know exactly when this happened? Animal hides and early fabrics rot away entirely, leaving absolutely no trace in the frozen earth. To find the truth, scientists had to look not at stones, but at a living, blood-sucking witness. A tiny, resilient parasite that followed us through the freezing darkness, the human louse. Before clothes, these insects roamed freely across our thick, natural fur coats. But when we lost our body hair, they were violently exiled, forced to retreat to the hair on our heads. Then, something miraculous happened. The invention of clothing created a brand new, warm ecosystem. A rogue population of lice abandoned the scalp, migrating down into the dark folds of the stolen animal hides. Hidden inside the warm, sweaty layers of fur, they evolved, becoming an entirely separate species. By analyzing the subtle mutations in their DNA, geneticists unlocked a biological ticking clock. The genetic split reveals that humans began wearing clothes daily over 70,000 years ago. These tiny, despised parasites became the ultimate time capsules of human survival. Yet, simply throwing a dead animal over our shoulders was not the final victory. A heavier, darker truth was hiding in the ice, a truth that would soon kill our strongest cousins. The giants of the Ice Age were about to fall because of a single, fatal flaw in their wardrobe. For hundreds of thousands of years, the Neanderthals ruled the frozen European landscape, unchallenged masters of the ice. They were true giants, heavily muscled, physically superior, and biologically adapted to the bitter cold. Like our ancestors, they hunted the massive beasts, violently stripping away thick, heavy hides for survival. Using sharp flint scrapers, they crafted crude cloaks, simple blankets thrown desperately over their broad shoulders. But as the ultimate deep freeze descended, raw physical strength was no longer enough to endure. They lacked one crucial piece of technology, a microscopic invention that would dictate the future. Without the delicate-eyed needle, Neanderthals could only punch crude holes and tie hides loosely. They wore simple, unshaped ponchos, heavy capes that draped over their frames but never sealed. When the brutal -40-degree winds howled, the freezing air violently rushed through every open gap. Precious body heat escaped from their loose sleeves and open collars, slowly draining their immense energy. Even the strongest, most resilient bodies cannot fight the relentless physics of extreme hypothermia forever. Exhausted and freezing, the great hunters of the Ice Age slowly collapsed into the endless white snow. While the Neanderthals faded into silent extinction, a new, physically weaker human was surviving. Homo sapiens survived not through muscle, but through a brilliant, unstoppable, technological revolution. Deep inside the shadowy Denisova cave, a solitary hunter sat by the fire, carving a tiny bird bone, while giants froze outside. A delicate, fragile bone needle held the salvation of humanity. Unlike the crude, blunt tools of the Neanderthals, this tiny instrument possessed a microscopic, world-changing detail. A meticulously drilled eye, allowing a thin sinew thread to carry life-saving heat, stitch by stitch. With this tool, animal hides were no longer just loose, clumsy blankets thrown over shivering shoulders. They meticulously cut the pelts, shaping sleeves, torsos, and legs to perfectly match the human anatomy. Sewing them tightly together, they permanently sealed out the lethal, freezing winds of the Ice Age. But the true genius lay in layers, combining different furs for ultimate, impenetrable thermal protection. Soft, warm rabbit fur sat directly against the skin, trapping body heat in a vital pocket of air, while a tough, windproof mammoth hide formed an indestructible outer shell against the raging blizzard. Hats, gloves, and fitted boots. The first complete wardrobe transformed a naked primate into an ice-conquering predator. Clad in their newly crafted armor, Homo sapiens walked fearlessly through the negative 40-degree wasteland. The harsh environment that doomed their giant cousins was now completely and masterfully subdued. But as basic survival was secured, a darker, more complex human instinct began to awaken. Warmth was no longer enough. The garments they wore began to transform into something else entirely. A silent, arrogant display of dominance, power, and deadly vanity. The dawn of fashion had arrived. With survival secured against the freezing wasteland, clothing underwent a radical, unexpected evolution. It was no longer just a barrier against the cold. It became the first visual language of humanity. The most skilled hunters began to adorn their thick furs with the deadly fangs of their fallen prey. Cave lions, bears, and wolves, wearing their teeth was a silent, arrogant display of ultimate dominance. And the vanity didn't stop there. Some traveled hundreds of miles just to harvest useless, beautiful ocean shells. They painstakingly sewed these rare shells onto their garments, establishing the first economy of luxury. Crushed earth and vibrant minerals returned, not to protect the skin, but to dye the leather in rich reds and blacks. In a single glance, without speaking a word, a stranger's clothing screamed their status, skill, and power. It was the prehistoric birth of fashion, the earliest form of social media etched in bone and hide. Tribes gathered around roaring fires, their leaders draped in magnificent, terrifying animal crests. Humanity had not only survived the apocalyptic ice, they had learned to celebrate their conquest over it. But the Earth is a restless, ever-changing stage. The great freeze that shaped their armor was ending. The massive glaciers began to weep. The temperature slowly but inevitably began to rise. The heavy, majestic furs that saved them were about to become their greatest, most suffocating curse. The Ice Age was melting away, and a completely new nightmare was dawning. The magnificent Ice Age was dying, and with it, the giant beasts that provided their salvation. As global temperatures rose, the frozen tundra transformed into a humid, muddy wasteland. The heavy, double-layered fur coats that once saved them now became suffocating traps of heat. Under the warm rain, animal hides absorbed water like massive sponges, becoming impossibly heavy. And worse, they began to rot. Sweat, animal grease, and dampness created a foul, decaying stench. Washing them was impossible. Soaking raw leather only made it stiff, brittle, and useless. Humanity faced a terrifying crisis. If the hunt failed or the herds vanished, they would have nothing to wear. They were hopelessly dependent on a dwindling supply of dead animals. They needed a miracle. Deep in the Caucasus Mountains, inside the ancient Zudzuana cave, a solution was found. It was not flesh, it was not bone. It was delicate, fragile, and green. 34,000 years ago, human hands reached out and harvested wild flax. These tiny plant fibers were lightweight, breathable, and incredibly strong when twisted together. Even better, they didn't rot in the dampness, and they could be washed clean without destroying them. For the first time in history, humanity realized they didn't have to steal their second skin from animals. They could simply grow it from the earth. But searching for wild plants was not enough to clothe a growing population. They made a radical decision to stop wandering and settle down. They planted seeds, watered the earth, and patiently watched the green stalks rise. The first agricultural fields were not just for food, they were for fashion. And they did not just tame the earth, they tamed the beasts. Sheep were bred not to be slaughtered, but to be gently sheared for their warm fleece. Wool and flax provided endless, renewable resources. But turning loose fibers into solid cloth by hand was agonizingly slow and tedious. Weaving a single garment by crossing threads finger by finger took months. Human ambition demanded something faster, something revolutionary. In the Neolithic age, a brilliantly simple wooden frame was erected, the hand loom. It was arguably humanity's very first complex machine. Vertical threads pulled tight, while a wooden shuttle violently threw the horizontal yarn across. It was a rhythmic, mesmerizing dance of engineering. The loom did not just weave fabric, it wove the foundation of modern society. Specialized labor was born. Farmers, shepherds, and dedicated weavers. Cloth became a precious commodity, a luxury traded across continents, building wealth, establishing empires, and defining human civilization. The prehistoric world was a cruel, unforgiving arena where every other species was a slave to evolution. To survive the cold, a beast must endure millions of years of agonizing genetic mutation to grow thicker fur, but the hairless primate rejected this cruel law. We declared a magnificent rebellion against the slow, merciless clock of natural selection. We did not wait for our bodies to change. We stole the skin of giants, and when that failed, we wove our own from the earth. In just a few minutes, we can put on a linen shirt for the desert or a thick wool coat for the tundra. We became the absolute masters of our own skin, completing the most audacious, spectacular survival story in the history of planet Earth.